one of the things that I want to kick off with what Josh said is this pressure point that we've felt since day one of making sure everything works like out of the gate. Because I think that's really one of the key hallmarks of success is that if everything's functional, if everything works day one, we set that level of expectation that it's going to be successful. The students feel like it's going to be successful. The parents feel like this is new, this is innovative, but it's going to be successful. I felt that very strongly from a networking infrastructure perspective because you know what? There's a whole lot of folks that come to campus with that have Linksys and Netgear routers at their home that are successfully connecting to the internet from their iPhones and iPod Touches and their iPads. And so why can't that just work here? Why can't 500 students in a 7,800 square foot auditorium, all of them connect at the same time and download a 64 meg PDF? First of all, there's something called the law of physics. But anyway, we're not going to go there. So that's a pressure point that I felt. So before we get all into the nitty-gritty about wireless and what it does and how it works, I wanted to throw out a couple of stats for you. Number one, on an average day, we see over 6,400 unique MAC addresses on our wireless network. By the way, those are not all iOS devices. There are some Android, some Windows Mobile. There's a Dell that's sitting right there. There's several other manufacturers. We even have Wii's on the network because we are a residential campus and they need to check their Netflix accounts, at least, to stream all their movies. The other thing to notice is that over 400,000 of those 6,400 unique devices, they connect to the wireless network over 400,000 times in a day. We see almost 30,000 an hour in our peak hour, which is between 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock in the morning. Somebody asked about device distribution statistics. What we see is that 40% of our associations occur in the residence hall, 21% occur in the learning spaces. Those are our academic spaces. We sort of chopped up, and we'll address that here in a second. We sort of chopped it up, and we said we have to deal with spaces differently. Residence halls act differently than what we see in learning spaces. Common spaces like this building, the campus center, even our rec center, our library, they function differently than a residence hall. And we have a couple other spaces. Athletic venues act differently. And so we still want to deal with them differently than when we have the deployment. Another thing to notice, and by the way, this is fresh statistics. I pulled this just yesterday, either that or I made it up. You get to decide. iOS devices account for 74% of the learning space associations. 74%, as opposed to residence hall where iOS devices represent 55%. I think that, intuitively, we sort of nod our head and say, okay, that makes sense, because what else do they have in the residence hall? Xbox 360, Roku, TiVo, the Vizio televisions. I've seen like 27 of those register on our wireless network in the last 3 months. The little animated graph is iOS devices per hour by building. The green is sort of common spaces. The red are our residence halls. The yellow are the orange. It was orange, it's sort of faded out. It's yellow now. Those are our academic spaces. And you can sort of see them balloon up at certain hours of the day. That's on September 19th, and you can see the hour mark. And those are just a cumulative of those hours. And you get to see you get the feel that in the evening or in the overnight hours, that's where the residence halls, that's where all the students are. And they're sort of, they're still, even at 3 o'clock in the morning, those devices are checking things and doing something. And then at 7 o'clock, the girls wake up, the guys are still sleeping. And then at 8 o'clock, all of a sudden the academic spaces explode because they're going to class. And then at 11 o'clock, when they go to chapel, all of a sudden the Moody Coliseum and some of the common spaces explode. And so you go to see the dynamic nature of what happens on our campus on an average day. All right, what are we gonna, So this is another graph that, again, looking at an average Monday this fall. We have 5 days of data points. We're going to continue to collect this throughout this semester and sort of say, what does this really tell us? Right now, this slide sort of represents the Wi-Fi associations by hour and by space. Again, I said we treat our spaces differently. We have academic, residence hall, common, athletic, what did I forget? Office spaces. So those locations that just have offices and no academic classrooms or residence halls, we treat those differently. And what you'll notice is that they have the far fewest number of associations in an hour. That's because I tell everybody to plug in. I'll be honest with you. Because that's a limited resource called that wireless, and we need to manage it accordingly. So that gives you a feel. You can definitely see that, again, the 10 o'clock hour is really sort of our peak hour, that 10 to 11. Apparently, that's when everybody does have class. And this is on a Monday, so 10 o'clock is the first. All of our freshmen meet together in our Cullen Auditorium. They break that into 2 sessions, so there's 500 kids in one session, 500 kids again at 1 o'clock, and you sort of see that represented there. And they do use the wireless. We see over 3,000 associations in that hour in just that space alone, which is really fun to engineer, and we'll talk about that in a second. Finally, wanted to take a look at the differences between devices in number of unique MAC addresses and the number of associations. I think this is significant because when you look at laptops, this number of laptop unique MAC addresses compared with our iPhones, they're relatively close. I mean, we're talking maybe 3-4 percentage points difference. But look at the number of associations. Laptop associations are very much lower than iPhone associations. Now, this was a revelation to me about 3 years ago when I said, why would that be? It's because you open up that device and you look at it and then you shut it down, you put it in your pocket. Your laptop, you open the clamshell and it stays open for at least an hour. There's a nap. Or if you're like me, it stays open like 4 days because it's sitting in your office. I plugged in though. So again, something very interesting. The last column there, the no designation, we do have a system where they self-identify what their device is, and not everybody follows instructions despite what Josh tells you. And so not everybody declares what their device is. And so we just throw it out there. Hey, you want to be truthful in the data collecting. Not everybody says what it is, but based on the, if you look at the unique addresses and number of associations, my hunch is those are mobile devices. They just didn't declare it. All right. Finally, this is looking at buildings or academic spaces, and you sort of get a feel that, again, 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock, that's really where we see a lot of students going to class, and you see that, you know, our Foster Science, that's the highest one there at, what is that, 8 o'clock? Apparently all those science majors wake up early. Us Bible majors never did. But you see Foster Science has the most associations in that 1 hour, but if you look at it cumulative over the day, our Don Morris or our communications building is where you see the most associations by building because they stay up late at night. And I roomed with a bunch of math majors, and they stayed up late too. Again, just get you a feel that, you know, really, the campus doesn't come alive in the academic space until 8 o'clock. That's, I think, intuitive, but it doesn't go to bed at 5. Their kids are in there still, you know, doing homework or in labs or doing something, and they're still hanging out. All right. What do I want to talk about today? I got 4 areas of emphasis. The first one is to recognize the need of mobile connectivity. Every time I go to a conference, every time I have a session, everybody says, well, why do you need mobile connectivity? Those are cellular devices. Let AT&T, let Verizon, let Sprint now, let them handle that. So we're going to talk a little bit about the need for mobile connectivity, because number one, I have to have something to talk about, right? The second thing I want to talk is the understanding of the difference between mobile and nomadic. Nomadic meaning laptops. those act differently, those function differently. We're going to touch on a little bit of that. Be aware of location influences, and that's where we talk about physical space and what does that mean when it comes to mobile connectivity. Engineering wireless for a space like this is much different than what we do for a classroom that seats 90. And then the other thing that I've been harping on, at least for the last 2 years, is you don't just wind it up and let it go. You have to revisit it. You have to tune it and optimize it. And sometimes that takes some creative thinking, and sometimes that means you have to interface with the professor and say, what are you doing? Don't do that. Why don't you use this tool or go through this method? And so there is some interaction that happens there, and we'll talk a little bit about that. All right, first thing. So one of the things that happens when we started this back in 2008, it was sort of launched upon us in the technology side of it. Sure, we were talking about it, but the reality sort of came crashing down when our president announced to a bunch of presidential scholars that, you know what, we're going to hand out iPhone and iPod Touch devices to every incoming freshman. And all of a sudden, all the technology folks said, you said what? So, for me, I was on a 4-year quest to provide wireless to the entire campus. Because if I didn't do it, the faculty, staff, and students were going to do it for me with their Linksys routers and Netgear routers. So I was there to ward those off and provide a wireless coverage, a wireless footprint. When they said, you know what, we could have every single student in every single room have a mobile device that's connecting to the wireless network, I said, oh, that's different. And so what happens is that we start talking about things of coverage and capacity. Because all of a sudden the reality is that, I mean, if you had talked to me 3 years ago and said every student in every classroom is going to have a laptop clamshell up, I would have said no way. But mobile devices, a smaller footprint, more handy, everybody has it with you. Okay, that's a reality. Now, how do we equip for that reality? And that's exactly what happened, is that we had to change mid-course and think about what does this really mean? What does the scope change? And the scope is, it's a conversation about coverage of footprint versus a conversation about capacity. How do you engineer for capacity? Ultimately for us, what it meant is that I was going to provide 350 wireless access points across my campus, all 208 acres, I think 208 acres, at least 90% of that 208 acres would have wireless coverage with 350 wireless access points. When we started doing the math, trying to figure out what does capacity mean, the ultimate result was we went from, today I have 750 wireless access points that cover my campus. I mean, it almost doubled. One of the key ingredients in that conversation was, so how many users should be per access point? Because an access point basically is a bridge, a link to the internet, and it has a finite uplink, and it has a finite usable bandwidth. So how do we provide acceptable bandwidth to every user? And so we ultimately landed on a metric of 30 users per access point. And that's what we try to use in most of our spaces until you get to certain spaces like a 6,400 square foot auditorium with 350 students in it, all of them connecting on the 2.4 gigahertz band. And that changes it. But that metric is how we went from 350 wireless access points to 750 wireless access points today. So let's talk about the need for mobile connectivity. Again, cellular versus wireless network connectivity. My number one point is you can manage your own wireless infrastructure. I don't care who you are, but you do not manage AT&T, Verizon, or Sprint's wireless infrastructure. We've tried. We have great relationships with many carriers, and they are good partners. But at the end of the day, you are not their only customer. Can I get an amen? Yeah, right. The other thing is that, you know, back in 2008, they were providing unlimited data plans. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not willing to give that up yet, not even for tethering. But today, they don't offer that. It's a 2 gig total per month. If I'm requiring a student to do something in a classroom that's going to infringe on that 2 gig, are they going to do it? No. Let's provide a wireless environment. Let's provide an opportunity for them to do what you've asked or what you've instructed or what you've assigned without infringing on a commodity that they're going to protect. They're much rather connect to Facebook and whatever else for their social life than they are to do their assignment if you required them to be only on the cellular network. So that's my soapbox. The other thing is it all comes back to this ubiquity of connected experience. Again, what can you manage? I love the Serenity prayer at the end. Accept what you cannot change, change what you can, and have the courage to know the courage to change what you can and have the wisdom to know the difference. If you can manage the end user's experience, do so. Because I think you create that ubiquity experience, and you can also address those fallout that happens, because the reality is that 20% of our student body who have gotten a mobile device do not have a cellular connected device. Early on, it was 30%, and it has come down. So, I mean, we're getting more and more cellular connected devices, but you're still, if I don't provide a wireless infrastructure, then how do those students with iPads, Wi-Fi's, how do those students with iPod touches connect? And again, it's ubiquity across the campus. You know, do you want that disparity in one facility versus another facility? You want ubiquity not only in equipment and a connected experience, but in location. And again, I think wireless positions you better for the changing use cases. What we did in 2008, in the fall of 2008, is a little bit different than what we're doing today. Because we've become more experienced, we've become more knowledgeable about what can happen. The devices have gotten better. And so now, you know, professors are more enabled, empowered to do something different and to use it differently. And I'll be honest with you, if you ask Josh and I, we can't tell you what all the use cases are. We have a faculty member that's down in over in the theater department that day one, he was uploading YouTube videos from his smartphones of an acting class. We didn't tell him to do that. He figured it out on his own. Today, they're doing a lot of different, they're using Dropboxes to share stage, I forget what the term is, but you know, where you sit there and know where your marks are, and they're doing that 6 months in advance of the production. Did we tell them how to do that? No, they figured it out. And so we basically get to come and play cleanup to say, how did you know how to do that? How, you know, was there an issue here? And he goes, no, it all works right because the wireless infrastructure is solid. I don't get to say that too often, by the way, so I take courage in that. So I can say that more often. All right, mobile and nomadic. Mobile devices are different than nomadic devices, or nomadic devices. What I call the 2-minute rule basically refers back to that idea that after 2 minutes, that mobile device just shuts off, unless you're playing with it, you know, Angry Birds or what have you, Facebook. But if you just let it by itself, it's going to shut off. And I think that's really what contributes to that high association. Although, last time I had that conversation, some guy from Apple jumped me in the parking lot afterwards and said, that doesn't happen now, not after 4. The other thing to note about mobile devices is that, is he here now, John? The other thing to note about mobile devices is the frequency that they operate. Now, frequency is a tender subject with me because with Wi-Fi, you have 2 non-overlapping or 2 license-free frequencies that you can operate on. We know them as 802.11a, 802.11b, g, and N sort of bridges the gap between the two of them, but not very well. And so 2.4 versus 5.8 gigahertz are really what we're talking about. 2.4 is the lower band, 5.8 is the higher band, but 2.4 is basically very congested. If your microwave, if you have an older microwave, it sort of hums on that 2.4 gigahertz range. Have you ever noticed you're at the house and all of a sudden your wireless sort of cuts off and you look back and the kids are popping popcorn? That's what's going on. It's humming at that 2.4 gigahertz. So I make sure that, I don't do anything, intensive until after kids go to bed. But anyway, the 5.8 gigahertz is less populated. The other thing is that 2.4 has 3 non-overlapping channels and the 5.8 has 16. That comes into play when we start talking about rooms that have a very high concentration, high density of users in it. 350, 500. 5.8 is the preferred because you have more overlapping channels. You can stick more APs in that area than you can if you're only operating on 2.4. What we've seen, and this is not indicative of iOS or Apple products, but what we're seeing in mobile products is most of them only operate on the 2.4 gigahertz range. I've heard 2 reasons for that. Number 1 is power consumption. If they operate on the 5.8, it would drain your battery faster. And I think we all agree we don't want our batteries drained faster. The second thing I've heard is that the 5.8 is not universal. It's not worldwide accepted as a license-free frequency. It's only US or North America. And so, if you're making a world product that ships to all different countries, you don't want one that has a 5.8 chip in it because it's not going to work. So, whether that is, that difference, what we see is laptops typically come with dual mode cards or dual band cards. Most laptops typically can do 5.8. The other thing what I would say is about nomadic versus mobile is that most laptops, you can get visibility into that card. You can go into that driver and say, prefer 5.8 gigahertz. You can go into that driver and say, when you see Ethernet, turn off the wireless. You have more visibility. On mobile devices, you typically don't have that functionality. You can't drill in and manage that driver. When we were first talking about doing, big, high concentrating deployments in classrooms and stuff, we talked to the NASDAQ, and they have their traders on the trading floor, and they had a special designed wireless for it, and they did, all these, several hundred folks in a very tight space, and they talked about, how they achieved this. And then one thing I took from that conversation is, well, we got a special driver written for that device, that tablet device. Tablet being, the screen pivots and folds down. A laptop tablet. And I said, oh, well, what if you were able to do that? What if you didn't have that visibility? And they said, well, it wouldn't work then. All right. Good to know. It doesn't help us, but anyway. The other thing that we found when we were doing research, the first year of our mobile learning initiative, is that if the phone is cellular, if it's your phone, the device is your phone, you are more likely to have it with you. How many people left their phone at the house today, or in the hotel, or in the car? I mean, Josh made a statement. The phone is critical to our conversation now. It's critical, part of our connectivity. How many of you left your laptops in the car, or at the hotel, or at the office? I wish I could have said that. It's over there. It's acting funny. Again, nomadic devices, they sit. Mobile devices, they go with you. That's significant. And that's one of the reasons why we had to put wireless everywhere. That's why, one of the reasons why I have wireless covering the walking trail that does the circumference of the campus. At least 86% of that walking trail is covered by wireless connectivity. I'll be honest with you, I did it so I can listen to ESPN radio on the app as I walk around. I would say run, but I'd be lying. I walk. So the other thing that this is my own personal opinion. This is not an endorsement or anything, but I think what's critical, or one of the innovations that really came out of this mobile technology is the App Store. Because while we say, Josh and I will confirm this, while we tell the students, we want you ready to go day one, the reality is not everybody listens. I know that surprises many of you in this room. Students don't listen all the time. I don't listen all the time. My wife tells me all the time. Wait, I was listening. But the innovation wasn't the mobile device. The innovation was the connectivity to the App Store. Because if they don't have it, they can go get it. To quote the famous line from Woody from Toy Story. If you don't have one, get one. And they can do it on the fly, and it takes less than 2 minutes, and they're ready to go. They're positioned. There's none of this, I have to go back to the store and buy it. There's not this credit card exchange process, or I have to go to the bookstore. They can do it on the fly, and within 2 minutes are positioned and ready to go, which I think is innovative. And not everything that you see it like that. We see a lot of web-enabled stuff. We see a lot of position of stuff going to the cloud. But the App Store, I think, is a marked differentiator between mobile devices and nomadic devices. Any questions so far? Ken, I saw your hand go up. You want to ask a question, I could tell. All right. All right, let's talk about location influences. By the way, this picture is taken of our Cullen Auditorium. This is that facility that I said we have 500 freshmen twice a week sitting in there, and they're all asked to get their mobile devices out, and let's take this quiz or answer this question, and they all work. They didn't at first. I'll humbly admit that. They did not work at first, but we got them working. Not all spaces are created differently, and that's one of the reasons why we started chopping up sort of the function of the spaces. So residence halls work differently. They have more sustained wireless connections than what we see in the learning spaces or in the office spaces. And the other thing is that residence halls, they have devices that are old. Have you ever realized that the Nintendo Wii, the game console, does not operate on a 802.11g connection that can't do 54 megs? Is that my device? It operates on an 802.11b. It can only do 11 megs. And the only reason I know this is because when we were tuning our wireless network, hey, it's my CIO. I hung up on him. Yay. When we were tuning our wireless network, we turned off the chopped in the low band of it, the 2 meg connections, and all of a sudden all the Nintendo Wiis quit working. And we heard complaints about it because they couldn't get to the Netflix. Not all spaces are created equally. We have to, so we had to turn back on that 2 meg connection speed in the residence hall so the Nintendo Wiis can work. I don't know of any Nintendo Wii that is functioning in the learning spaces, so we can do different things in the learning spaces than we can do in the residence halls. Office spaces are similar, as well as we can do different things in athletic spaces. Because again, you're not trying to provide the same connectivity. If we tried to provide the same level of connectivity in the learning spaces that we do in the cafeteria, our network would crater every day at 11:30 when we have 2,500 students come to lunch. So we have to make some considerations. The other thing that room layouts provide some interesting obstacles, some interesting opportunities. The first day we found this out was in August of 2008. We had a professor very amped up about using mobile devices in the classroom. And he's a very popular Bible teacher. He had 300 freshmen, all of them with their mobile devices in hand. They're all sitting in this, stadium-seated auditorium. He says, everybody pull your device out, go to this URL, pull down this file. And 4 people worked. And I said, no, the wireless is set up and we engineered and we have the plans and here, let me show you the baseline. It didn't work because they were all attached to this one that they walked by when they walked in the room, and that one just couldn't handle it. we started looking at it in the front. It's stadium seated, so the back of the room is like, the ceiling is like 10 feet high. Not a lot of basketball players, go to that class. And in the front, it's 27 feet high, floor to ceiling. And what happens is they walk from the back down to the front, they connect to that one, and they would never go off of it. And so we had to do some creative things. We had to think about, okay, how do we do this differently? At one point, I had 12 access points sitting on mic stands, sitting on the tables, going, down the center and down left and right. You remember that, Ken? Down left and right of this room. And we were just trying, it was sort of a hit and miss. We're like, okay, what works? Did that work? No, that didn't work. Okay, let's try something else. Did that work? No, that didn't work. Ultimately, where we landed is that we had to put the access points 2.5 feet off the ground along the east and west boundary walls of that room. And what happened is that provided enough attenuation, being that low, that you and I, the bodies of water, helped to attenuate that signal, and it worked for a year. The iPhone 4 came out. And apparently, it's a little bit different, a little stronger, a little better reception, and that configuration didn't work all of a sudden. We had to turn off a couple more radios, and so, because in 2008, we could have 6 radios all operating on the 2.4 gigahertz band in that room, 6,400 square foot, and that provided it for the 3G. When the 4 came out, apparently it's got enough sensitivity changes that we had to turn off so that there's only 3 radios providing connectivity to 300 students in that room. Now, it's a little better, but only 3. Again, sometimes functionality means you have to make exceptions. That room is an exception. The auditorium where we have 500 students is an exception. You break the rules. You don't use 30, you use 125 students per access point. Again, it's got a gig connection. It's an 802.N radio. It's a little better, and you can break some of the rules. All right. Finally, let's talk about tune and optimize. Again, I'm a firm believer that you can't just wind it up and let it go, because if you do, it's going to break, just like a kid's toy. There is a lot of interference that we're starting to see on that 2.4 gigahertz band. Number one, right now, our chief interference device, it's called an HP wireless printer. Because that's what you can buy for 50 or 60 bucks now. You go to Best Buy, you go to Walmart, and that's what you're picking up. Is a printer. It's an inkjet printer, but it has a wireless interface so you can print from your mobile device. That's great at home. When you bring it to campus, it causes interference. Because it creates ad hoc networks, what they call Viro ad hoc networks, the free Wi-Fi setup or the HP setup networks. And all of a sudden, not only is that printer causing interference, but now that device is causing interference because you connected to it at home and you've got it all set up. Bluetooth devices, again, they operate on that 2.4 gigahertz spectrum. What does this interference do? It means that what we've experienced, specifically like residence halls, where these are probably more prolific than in learning spaces, is that students then can't connect to the ASU network is because that printer is on the same channel that the closest wireless access point is, and it's basically deferring all the signals. It's consuming all that bandwidth, and that student can't get their laptop connected to the ASU network, and so they call us. And then they say, well, it works in the Bible building, it works in the business building. When I come home, it doesn't work here. It doesn't work in this room. And so we started having to go and chase these down. At this present moment, I've got almost 25 work orders with our student system tracking down printers. And that's we've been in class, 6 weeks, 7 weeks? So one of the things, for those of you who are really technical minded, what are the tool sets you use to track this stuff down? Number one is experience. You can't teach some of this stuff, you just gotta learn it. You just gotta been there, done that. And that's invaluable. I mean, people can talk about a room, and I can walk in and say, because I've been here for so long, I know what this does, this room does, this how it works. I can tell you maybe what the cause is. Experience is critical. The second thing is baselines. Taking a picture of the wireless environment after you put it in, so you know what it did at one point, so you can look at the comparison. What changed? I mean, how many of us ask that question? Okay, this is broken. Okay, what changed? Baselines provide you that start to say what has changed. The last thing I would say is spectrum analyzer, and a critical tool when you're looking at what is going on, what is interfering. Not to endorse products, but we use Air Magnet. We've used them since 6 months after they started. It's a critical piece of our tool set to find that. Because it allows us to look at per channel, it allows us per frequency, and it allows us to say, what else do you see in this, what else is going on? Critical piece. The other thing is that real estate doesn't just refer to screen size. I mean, how many of us know of programmers who sit there and are optimizing mobile websites? Okay, how many of you have mobilized websites for your front web? Anybody? Me neither. Anyway, but a web experience that's mobilized for the mobile screen size is a lot different than if it is for a laptop. I mean, Josh talks about that we mobilize the mobile help site so that the links are smaller and icons and cleaner. Basically, the same kind of optimization needs to occur when you're talking about your wireless infrastructure. You need to understand how do you set it up so that all the mobiles can get connected. Number two, how do you set it up so that the mobile devices or the experience is similar? So maybe that means you go in and tell a professor you don't download a 10 or 100 gigabyte movie and have them watch it on their mobile devices as opposed to throwing it up on the screen during the class. Part of that is optimizing that experience and that expectation, as well as optimizing the room itself and how the room functions. And again, I think optimization is a critical part of it. You have to set it up, and then you come back and revisit it. You have to set it up, and you come back and talk to the professor, talk to the students. How did it function? What happened? Did you notice any critical failures? Is there a spot in the room that everybody goes to that knows, hey, that's a dead zone? Sometimes you can catch that, but an empty room acts differently than a room full of people. And so sometimes you gotta have those conversations and engage with people and say, what were your experiences? Josh does this all the time with students. What was your experience? How did you, what failures did you see? And that's critical, especially when you're talking about an environment, because I can't be at 750 locations at the same time. Thankfully, I can't be at 750 locations at the same time. So that's all I had today. How am I doing on time, Jeff? Look, doing good. All right, I've got 10 minutes before we run off to lunch. Any questions? Yes, sir. The manufacturer is Aruba. The product is actually a white labeled or an OEM from Alcatel-Lucent. We have we're basically an Alcatel-Lucent shop for all of our data networking, and so they've provided the wireless, but it's an Aruba manufacturer. Yes, ma'am.
Are there certain structures, building structures that you're not able to upgrade to a wireless, or make it more challenging to upgrade to a wireless?
So the question is, are there specific buildings and building structures that are more challenging than others? Yes, the answer is yes. The buildings that were constructed in 1929, a little more difficult to wire and set up than the buildings that were constructed. This building was in 2000. 2007, I think. So those buildings provide some unique experiences, specifically with the stucco walls and the concrete blocks, versus if you can get into them during construction process. What I find, though, is that really wiring is not as much the issue as it is getting a feel for the room and the propagation of that wireless signal. So some rooms, we're going to suck it up because of the students that are going to be in there and the usage that occurs. Some rooms, you don't have that many students, and so that propagation of that wireless sort of extends out into the hallways. And so that's the other thing, is that we have to look at holistically at the building and what does the building, so I look at individual rooms and say, how many people do I have per room? How many people, and what's going to happen here? But the other things I do is I look at how many classrooms do I have in this building? How many offices do I have in this building? And think of it holistically as a building than just an individual room. Does that help?
And Arthur, just to say from a support perspective for the networking guys, I've never seen a team anywhere else that is so attentive to that situation. We have rooms that someone says, hey, we've got a problem in, and they've changed their seating, and all of a sudden there were big changes now. I mean, I cannot say that's a situation that from a support perspective, you always get that, well, it's not the network, it's something else. From a lot of network groups,
It's not the network.
Something that Arthur said. So we appreciate that.
And that's the other thing. Part of that optimizing and tuning process means that we basically create a strike force team at the start of the semester, and it's made up of networking folks, it's made of educational technology folks, our technology trainers engaged in that, and usually from tech support side. And we say, if you have a problem, let us know. And we will get the strike team out there and see what's going on. Because, again, not everybody does it the same way. A couple of weeks ago, we went to a classroom over in the Biblical Studies building, and the comment was it didn't work. Okay, your first question is, what didn't work? Is it the wireless? Was it the link that you provided? Was it quiz? What didn't work? And so the process, rather than say what, we said, okay. And so we got a team of people there. And we showed up and we watched what was going on, and we helped out. Some of the students didn't have the Blackboard mobile app on their device, so we helped them get the Blackboard mobile app on their device. By the way, I'm very poor at helping people get the applications on their device. I'm just saying. I'm more of an infrastructure guy. I want to see the big picture, stand back, and say it's not the network. But anyway, the other thing that we found out is the process that the professor had established. She said, okay, open up your Blackboard mobile app, go to these, hit this menu bar, select this option, this will bring up this page, go to that menu bar, hit this option, and that will kick you out to a Google form. And some of us scratched our heads and said, why didn't you just give them a shortened URL to the Google form? Made sense. But again, it's that process of having multiple people there who can sit there and help diagnose what's going on. Ultimately, the wireless was awesome. The wireless functioned great. Comment on my superior ability to do that. But anyway. Yes, sir.
I have two questions. One, how do you fund your infrastructure? Two, do you meter client bandwidth?
Okay. I can answer the second one really easy. No. Client bandwidth is not metered. What we've been able to do is, we have a great relationship. We've set up a funding model with our administration of basically providing inflational increases. We hope that continues. Where that allows us about every 18 to 24 months, we double the bandwidth going out to the internet, the commodity bandwidth. By the way, make sure everybody realizes we are commodity bandwidth only. We don't have that wonderful connection to I2, just FYI. And if you want to help me out and get that, I'd appreciate talking to you afterwards. So commodity internet we've set up an inflationary funding process where about every 2 years we get to double it, at least increase it. The last couple of times we've doubled it. The other thing that you asked, so this funding model, this wireless, how did that work? First year was capital. strictly capital. And in fact, what we did is we funded it over a 3-year process. It was originally 4, but when they said, "Hey, look, everybody's going to have an iPhone. You need to have wireless done," and I said, "Okay, I need more money." And so we accelerated it by a year. We were able to get it done in 2 and 3 years. The second thing we did is that at the same time is that we were able to tap into the student technology fee, and we have been able then to funnel a certain level of funding from that student technology fee every year and apply it to upgrades. So, which is great because, wireless doesn't stop. 802.11n is the big thing right now, and that's what I'm doing. And so for the last 2 years, and I'll continue at least for another year and a half, is I'm going to continue upgrading to 802.11n everywhere. And hopefully the next one comes out so I can continue that upgrade process and keep current with what the technology is. So does that help? Oh, you said 2. That's it. You hit your limit. We're metering you.
Okay, one more.
Yeah, go.
Mobile device management, do you use a system like that, or to find out what you're using?
All right, so mobile device management, we do not treat mobile devices any different than we treat any other device on our wireless and wired network. So we use network access control through Bradford Campus Manager. I would not recommend that product, by the way. Wait, was that out loud? So we do NAC, and the way we do NAC is we do MAC layer authentication. So when everybody came in this morning, if you aren't a member of the ASU community, you got connected to the ASU Wireless, you got a little web page, a Captive Portal pop up, and you put in your credentials. Hopefully they were accurate. We will check you, pat you down. TSA, here I come. And basically that's NAC. I mean, that's our network access control process. If you're an ASU community user, students who first come in, they put in their credentials, their username, their password. It authenticates against LDAP, and then it captures that MAC layer address. It ties it to a user, and then we report on the back end of that. The stats that I put up there, basically I'm also then pulling log files from my wireless system where I can see associations. I don't do duration yet because that takes too long, and I don't have the math skills to do that. I'm only doing 6th grade math because my 6th grader needs help every night. I can do negative and positive division and multiplication and solve for X, but anyway. Integers, no, shh, easy. So basically that's what I'm doing right now. That's how I'm reporting. And so again, I said our system is somewhat flawed because all we can pull right now is what they declared. I can't really tell you what it is. Our wireless vendor says OS or device fingerprinting is coming if you're willing to upgrade. And how much did that cost? But anyway, so we're still trying to figure out what does that fingerprinting mean and what does that really provide us. Functionally, I'm not convinced it does. Reporting, you better believe it, because our higher ups are really interested in, okay, if we say it did this now, how can we apply that to research? How can we apply that to what the guys 2 doors down are talking about in some of their mobile research projects? What else? Everybody wants to go to lunch now. Yes, sir.
Have you, with the augmentation of wireless mobile devices, have you seen any transitory decreases in some of the hardware systems or phone systems?
So the question is, with mobile devices, have you seen a corollary to a decrease in wired connectivity? The answer is yes. And by the way, I'm trying to refute that and re-educate folks that when you're specifically in the residence halls, is that when you're in the residence halls, plug in. It's a more reliable and it's a more sustainable connection. For all the mobile device users out there, you understand that, look, if everybody is using that wireless, it's congested. If we can pull some people off, if we can route them to the wired connection, that's better for everybody, correct? And so what I've seen, we pulled some numbers last spring, is that right now about only 25% of the residents, the Ethernet jacks in the residence halls do we see activity on. Whereas 3 or 4 years ago, it was more like 75%. So I mean, it's a significant decrease. We haven't done it over a period of time. So right now, that's just a one snapshot in time. And so we're going to continue to monitor that and say, you know, what does this really say about it? But the other thing is, anecdotally, our dean of our business school came up to us and said, I'm having trouble getting connectivity in my office. He sits over there by the window at the very far edge of the building. And we said, well, how come this yellow cord's not plugged in? He says, because I want to be able to get up and go. I said, leaving? Somebody chasing you? Plug in. He goes, no, I want that mobility aspect that I can take my laptop and walk out. And so, I mean, anecdotally, yes, we're seeing that. Statistically, I can only talk about the resident space. I do. No. So for instance, residence halls, what universities always talk about, ever since we lost all the funding through long distance resale, everybody's been talking about how do you pull out the lines in the residence halls. That's a sunk cost. We already paid for that. What I could say is that our average monthly bill hasn't really changed since we started mobile. But I will say is that we're seeing a lot more pressure to do some kind of fixed mobile convergence, to do tying the mobile devices with their desk phones or, with all the communication options. I mean, why else is Avaya? Why else are Siemens, all the other big players talking about integrating with Facebook and everything else? I mean, unified communications is a hot button in that space, or a hot term in that space. The reality is that I'm not sure anybody's really figured it out and got the smoking gun for it. But I do think, yeah, how do we tie these things together and make them more useful? And I think the problem is that what's useful to you is not necessarily going to be useful to me. And so how do you deal with all those differences in the use case scenarios? You had a question, sir?
Yeah. Are you voice over IP?
The phones in this building are. We have about 150 voice over IP out of 3,500 lines that we have deployed, about 150 voice over IP. I've got copper so much all over our campus that really we do voice over IP phones only on a, if it's a cost justifiable. This building, it was having to, pull wiring from our phone system all the way over here. It was a cost, it was even cost-wise, and so we said, hey, this is a new fancy building. Let's put voice over IP and say we have voice over IP. So that's what we did. Any other questions? Come on. How are we doing on time, Josh? Don't make me sing. 11:53. All right. Well, if that's it, then I think my song and dance is done. I appreciate it. By the way, my email's up there, so if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to email me. Don't call me. Just email me. And I'm here all day, so I'll see you guys around. Thank you.